Walk into any active vocational beauty academy, and you immediately see dozens of students executing fast-paced chemical services, precision cuts, and styling. Unlike traditional academic degrees that rely on classroom lectures, qualifying for a cosmetology license in the United States requires thousands of mandatory, hands-on practical training hours. This diagram illustrates the primary site for this training, the school clinic floor. It is a space defined by a volatile dual identity. One side of this blueprint functions as a state-regulated educational laboratory. Its explicit purpose is to satisfy state consumer protection mandates and execute strict pedagogical objectives. Simultaneously, the space operates as a low-cost commercial salon, extracting revenue directly from the general public. Operating a commercial enterprise using student labor creates immediate structural friction. State health codes designed to protect consumers routinely collide with federal labor standards designed to protect workers. This structural friction leaves institutions caught between competing regulatory mandates, creating a legal vulnerability that standard school operations often fail to address. The baseline rules for all beauty education are dictated by state-specific statutory codes, chartered historically to protect consumer health and safety. However, the operational cultures and baseline training hours required by these state boards diverge wildly across jurisdictions. This side-by-side comparison matrix highlights that divergence. In the left column, Kentucky mandates 1,500 training hours and an in-person practical demonstration. In contrast, California Senate Bill 803 reduced its requirement to 1,000 hours and eliminated the practical exam entirely. Despite their formal mission statements prioritizing consumer safety, many of these state regulatory boards focus their enforcement on administrative control rather than proactive public education. This regulatory environment breeds an industry culture of fine-line compliance, a model where school operators treat state health and education regulations strictly as static cost burdens to be managed. Under this model, an institution will meet the bare technical minimums on paper, maintaining the required instructor-to-student ratio, while instructing teachers to manage multiple clinical stations simultaneously to maximize clinic floor retail revenue. Doing the absolute minimum legal requirement while scaling commercial operations creates severe structural vulnerability. When institutions treat state safety laws as a paper-shuffling exercise, they inadvertently expose their clinic floors to aggressive federal scrutiny. That scrutiny comes primarily through the Fair Labor Standards Act. The high-stakes federal question governing every beauty school is precise. At what exact point do the students serving paying clients cease being a trainee and legally become an unpaid employee? This legal matrix outlines the 4 landmark federal appellate cases, Velarde, Hollins, Benjamin, and Eberline, that resolve this dispute using the primary beneficiary test. The core metric of this test evaluates the economic reality of the clinic floor. Courts look specifically at whether the student's clinical work corresponds directly to academic credit and state board hours. Federal courts consistently rule that students are not employees if the primary recipient of the labor's benefit is the student achieving their required state licensure. The legal boundaries of student labor became more defined following the Sixth Circuit's ruling in Eberline v. Douglas J. Holdings. This pie chart represents the 1,500-hour state-mandated curriculum block. The Sixth Circuit used this to establish task segmentation. The red slice breaking away represents auxiliary tasks, janitorial work, and laundry, uncompensated labor falling entirely outside the core state sanitation curriculum. If a school directs students to wash endless loads of commercial laundry or stock retail shelves, the educational purpose vanishes. The school becomes the primary beneficiary of that specific segment of labor. For those segmented hours, the student transforms back into a commercial employee, rendering the school in direct violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Failing to strictly segment clinical tasks strips away the educational exemption. As evidenced by the $2.8 million settlement against the Douglas J. Aveda Institute in the Eberline case, this oversight results in devastating financial liability. The legal vulnerabilities of beauty education begin long before a student reaches the clinic floor. They start in the admissions office. This flowchart models the traditional office-only contract model, historically relied upon by the vocational beauty sector. Notice how the enrollment documents are locked behind a physical intake appointment. By hiding tuition costs and itemized fees offline, this opaque model weaponizes psychological urgency and information asymmetry, specifically targeting low-income and immigrant demographics. Prospective students are pressured to sign legally binding financial agreements immediately to secure promotional pricing, eliminating their ability to consult family members or legal advisors. The alternative is a public contract model, built on the practice of voluntary institutional disclosure. Voluntarily publishing standard contracts, complete catalogs, and itemized refund policies in open digital repositories strictly satisfies the consumer disclosure requirements demanded by federal accrediting agencies like NACAS and COE. Structurally transparent contracts allow students to compare terms from home. Open access serves as an institution's first line of defense against predatory recruitment claims and high student default rates. These transparent operational and legal models are directly tied to an institution's federal financial survival. Under the U.S. Department of Education's Gainful Employment and Financial Value Transparency rules, vocational programs face strict gatekeeping metrics. The primary metric to evaluate these programs is the debt-to-earnings ratio, measuring annual debt service against annual earnings. In traditional models with tuition exceeding $20,000, graduates carry significant debt, triggering a high numerator and a failed federal threshold. Schools relying on fine line compliance and high federal student loans structurally risk losing their financial aid eligibility entirely if the average earnings of their graduates remain low. Pioneering institutions utilize gold standard overcompliance, deploying low tuition, cash-based, debt-free financing models that reject federal loans. When you plug a debt service of 0 into the equation, you mathematically force the entire debt-to-earnings ratio to 0. Achieving this structural balance requires a unified policy shift across all levels of oversight, beginning directly with state licensing boards. State administrative codes must establish right-to-cure warning windows. Inspectors must allow schools to correct minor administrative or sanitation errors before executing punitive fines or license suspensions. At the federal level, national accreditors must strictly mandate the public posting of blank enrollment contracts on school websites and enforce mandatory multi-day reflection periods prior to signing. By integrating state safety mandates, strict federal labor segmentations, and mathematical financial transparency, the beauty education sector protects both the vulnerable vocational student and the legal integrity of the institution itself.